All right, so I think we can start right now. I have a pretty long introduction, so I can start right now.
Perfect.
So I have prepared a few words, if you would allow me. Uh, I'm very excited about this, and frankly speaking, I usually buy a copy of. Of Dr. William books along with other copy for my father.
Thank you.
So yeah, but we did have a lengthy discussion with regard to the 6G manifesto because he keep asking me, why can't you write like William? And I keep telling him, I can't. First of all, I'm not a native speaker, uh, but most importantly, I think we all can agree that the guy can write in the most simplest way. Is it right? And 6G Manifesto, I think we can also agree that it's the best book in terms of how easy you can just finish its reading in a couple of hours. So if you are lazy enough to read the book, he has prepared for you what is called the long summary. And if you're really that lazy and can read a couple of pages on that, he has prepared to you a short summary. If you don't have the time and you have 30 seconds to read, in the last page, 6G Manifesto, everything. He has really summarized everything in that page. But frankly speaking, I discover how ignorant I am perhaps 2 decades ago. It's not a secret. I'm a big fan of Professor Martin Cave. Has all his books, and William has been, if I may say, assisting him in simplifying the technical aspects of it. But then I Googled William at that time, and I found out that he has two wonderful books: Wireless Communication, The Future, and I think he was lazy when he wrote the title of the second book,
Yeah.
The Future of Wireless Communication. But it's two wonderful books, and in two books he just predicting what is the future is all about when it comes to wireless technologies and its deployment. And he even admit that in that instance I was wrong, and in that instance I was right. And when we found out that he even finished criticizing the mobile industry, he has turned it into the satellite industry. Watch his last couple of posts on the satellite regulations. So he questioned everything. And I think who's better to join William than Dean Bobley today? Dean is, if I may say, Dean is not very popular within the mobile industry. The guy questioned everything, right? And guess what? Some in many instances, it turned out that he's right. He's right. So my last confession, if I may say, I've tried to invite a couple of people from the mobile industry to this session, but I failed. I will play the devil's advocate today. And Dr. William, don't hate me for this, but I have a couple of, if I may say, difficult question that has been mentioned by many in their criticism to your into your argument. Last but not least, this workshop wouldn't be possible without the support of Dr. Volker Stoker. I'm a big fan of his work. I invite you all to visit his. I will not be able to pronounce that correctly because it's very long. Is it Plamadisco? Volker, help me out here.
PLAMADISO. But there's all kinds of variations I've heard, so don't worry.
Yes. But this is the longest one. But anyway, it's a very fruitful discussion that gathers the elite of telecommunication research policy. And I must also thank my mentor, my guru, if I may say, Professor Jason Wally, Vice President of ITS and board member of TPRC. I think he's still in the States attending the TPRC. But thank you so much, Dr. Jason, for your support in the last year. So, sorry for the lengthy discussion, but our program today is going to be very simple. I think we have a presentation from Dr. William, and then perhaps some introductory remarks from my dear friend Dean. And then I will play the devil's advocate, just have a couple of questions to William and Dean, and then we're gonna open the floor for our audience today. So, because I don't have any better way to spend my Friday evening, I'm here with you, and I promise you a very enjoyable discussion. So, Dr. William, please go ahead.
Great, thank you. Let me just pull these slides up, and I'll make a start. And thank you for the very kind remarks. And please do dive in with any kind of criticisms, and devil's advocates comments are always great to address. So I'm just going to spend 5 to 10 minutes, not very long, just giving a quick overview of the book, just to refresh people who may have read it some time ago, or indeed haven't read it at all. So my starting point is to ask, what do people actually want from communications? And I think that's a flaw in the way that 5G was developed. We didn't really look at what people wanted. We kind of assumed that we knew, or that anything that was futuristic would be great and would be taken up. And if you look at the surveys that have been done, and there are a few of these out there, they all are fairly similar. And essentially, the conclusion they come to is the most important thing for most people is cost. And then after that, it's some mix of things that I often bundle together as, I've got some background noise there, as what I call ubiquity. So the mix of reliability, quality, coverage, the ability to make a call and a good quality call, or browse the internet or video call or whatever it might be, wherever you are. And things like speed, as you can see, is right down there, a tiny amount. So cost and ubiquity really are the main things that we should be trying to address with future telecommunication systems if we want to meet the clear user needs that are out there. And what we shouldn't be trying to address is the sort of futuristic, metaversey kind of thing. To some degree, that's gone away now after the hype around the metaverse 3 or 4 years ago. That's faded dramatically. And you can see things like the VR headset sales here. It was relatively high in 2016, fell away a bit, peaked in 2021 when Meta were providing really big subsidies for the Quest headset, and then has been falling away since. And the numbers are actually really tiny, 7 million a year compared to 1 to 2 billion cellular handsets a year. So I think we can be fairly sure this is not the right direction to be heading in for any kind of a 6G system. But unfortunately, that's the direction that a lot of the manufacturers, some of the academics and others had been heading into. And if you look at the slides that Nokia, that Samsung and the ITU produced, there's a lot of this kind of cyber physical world type stuff, what I sometimes call 5G on steroids, a lot of futuristic kind of hyper reliable, immersive communication kind of aspects to this. Now, we can talk more about this as we get into the debate. This is softening to some degree. So I think that the worst cases here are no longer likely to happen. But nevertheless, there's still a lot of people out there that still talk about the ITU type of activities around that overall kind of diagram. Some of which are okay. In particular, ubiquitous connectivity very much hits the target for one of the key user requirements, but plenty of the others are kind of reruns of 5G on steroids. So if we're not going to go there, where are we going to go? And essentially what I said earlier on was people want lower cost and they want ubiquitous connectivity. So how do we do that? Almost always developing better coverage, better, more capable networks requires spending money, and that would inevitably lead to higher bills. So we need to find innovative ways to improve the overall ubiquity of connectivity, whilst at the same time, ideally, not spending too much money, not forcing up the costs of the networks. And the way to do that, I think, is to make use of the multiple different networks that we have as far as possible. So, for example, where we have not spots, relatively small areas which don't have coverage, often those are specific to particular networks, and a different network might well have coverage in that particular space. So if we had some kind of national network roaming that would allow us to access coverage from other networks under certain situations where we needed to, then that could dramatically help there. And of course, in the past, we've shied away from that for all sorts of reasons, not least because the standards didn't allow it to work very smoothly without heavy battery drain and so on. But if we're developing a new standard, then that new standard can address that and can improve that situation. In the rural area, I think if there's no coverage, then we will have to spend some money to provide it. But satellites might be part of the answer here, at least. They can provide at least some connectivity where there's none at all. And it may be that some of the ideas around high altitude platforms have a role to play here. It's not clear yet. There's still embryonic, there's still no really good use cases or really good sort of demonstrations of actual commercial deployments of those, but there's some promising ideas. Inside buildings, by and large, every building has already got Wi-Fi. No point effectively duplicating that resource where it's usable. Instead, we need a situation where we can just log on automatically to every Wi-Fi all the time without all of the kind of what's the password and logging in, all those other kind of things that tend to result in us not using it as much as we might, or not even being aware that it's available. And then in places like trains, there probably will need to be something very specific to address that. And beyond that, where the cells don't have enough capacity, then by and large, these are cells that probably could be enhanced with a bit more 5G deployment or a bit more spectrum. Or we might even start to look at ways to try and manage demand a bit better, such that we can spread the capacity a bit more evenly without necessarily requiring too much extra expenditure. So by and large, the concept of HETNets, heterogeneous networks, not a new concept. It's been around at least since 3G, which was meant to be a universal mobile telecommunications system, but never really worked properly and worked well. So how might we make it work well? Well, I think one of the key issues is to lift some of the functionality that currently resides predominantly in a cellular network up above all of the different networks. And I've got the idea here of what I call a multi-network coordinator. So what's going on here? Why do we need that? Well, at the moment, essentially what we do is we try and link the cellular network into a Wi-Fi network or similar. So if you want your cell phone to work on Wi-Fi, you use Wi-Fi calling, and that requires tunneling through to the cellular operator. And indeed, the cellular network is kind of the central underpinning point. It's the point where our identity, our mobile number comes from. And it's the place where there's a database that knows where we are and how to get hold of us. So essentially, it's the only real way to communicate to people. But that reliance on the cellular network as the underlying sort of hook is one that's led to the problems that we have today. It means that we have to have special tunneling into Wi-Fi. That makes that sort of integration difficult. It relies on the cellular operators to coordinate everything, and they don't have the incentives necessarily to do that or want to move to different networks. So what I'm suggesting is that we lift up the sort of central point of understanding where a user is and how to route any incoming messages to them above all the other networks. So it would be a relatively simple database. It would simply say, okay, I happen to know that William's currently on that Wi-Fi network and he's currently using WhatsApp. Somebody wants to call him. Okay, I need to route that as a WhatsApp type call through to that Wi-Fi network. And that would be the simplest function of this coordinator. So it wouldn't necessarily be a particularly complicated thing, but it provides that means of managing multiple devices potentially across multiple different networks. And it can then link into various over-the-top providers like WhatsApp and others. And indeed, WhatsApp to some degree is that kind of coordinator at the moment. It can route calls to my laptop when I'm on Wi-Fi or whatever it might be. But I don't think we want to end up in a world where we're reliant on one provider, WhatsApp, for all our global connectivity needs. That just feels too dangerous. So we need a world where we can have multiple different over-the-top providers, and essentially a message from one can be routed to the other. So that's the basic underlying sort of architectural change, just lifting that up above the cellular networks. If we have that coordinator, I think it could usefully do other things. It could help users move across networks. So I'm not suggesting it handles handover within a cellular network. That's best done by the cellular operator. But it might be able to say to a device, hey, if you're in, given that I know where you are, you're currently on cellular, if you end up with quite a weak signal, here are the Wi-Fi nodes around you that you might want to take a look at that you can automatically sign on to. So effectively, it can just help out the devices with some additional information that allows the devices to then make local decisions themselves. And maybe that's to move to satellite as well. Also, helpfully, it could handle authentication. That's often one of the issues with people using Wi-Fi. And it could also handle things like legal intercept requirements, which would just make life easier, and indeed maybe the only workable place to do it anyway in this kind of a situation. So that's essentially my underlying thinking around 6G. It's the idea that it becomes a really well managed and designed HETnet that tightly integrates lots of different networks together in a way that we can really move across them seamlessly, preserving all of our functionality, including APIs and other things like that, and therefore hopefully meet the key user needs. Is it likely to happen? The difficulty here is that it's not really in the interests of any of the large players at the moment. It doesn't really suit the Ericssons or the Nokias. It doesn't particularly suit the current existing operators. It's hard to see who would be a key driver behind all of this, unless it was some of the over-the-top providers or similar who saw benefit in this and pushed it forward. So I think it's a difficult ask to see how we get to it. I think it's a sensible kind of concept, but a very difficult thing to see how we might actually deliver. And that's me done. Let me stop sharing that and hand it back to Mohammed to ask all those awkward questions.
Now, you always surprise me. So first of all, I like the last slide. I have a personal remark. Sometimes you have mixing art with technology. So I'm not sure about people would notice. This is your best. Not sure if it's not seen, but the cover of the end of Telecom history. It's a masterpiece. So you have this ability also to represent in one picture how we should think. So thanks so much. Dean, perhaps for a couple of remarks, if you would like.
Sure. Yeah, definitely. Thanks, William. Thanks for inviting me on this. So, along with William and also Jeff Hollingworth is the third part of the 6G Reset triumvirate. So we curated this organization to try, or not even organization, basically people who got angry about things to discuss the future of 6G and try to avoid the potential mistakes of 5G being repeated. What my view is it's aligned with Williams in some ways, but I diverge in some others. So I completely agree that the core point of 6G ought to be around fixing all the problems that we need to fix. It's identify what the gaps are and fix those, whether it's around coverage, whether it's also around energy consumption, whether it could be around network sharing and sharing of resources. But I do think that there's also an argument that given what's happened, frankly, from the time when 6G started being talked about to now, that it is fit for the AI era and the AI world. And I think we can't really ignore that elephant in the room. And so that we have to think about the roles of AI in building and running networks, but also in the way that networks sort of are there to support AI applications. Now, to be perfectly frank, I think the vast majority of all AI will go over fixed communications. Certainly at the moment, most AI-related data is between or inside data centers. That's why all the optical companies are doing hugely well at the moment. So the actual bit that goes over the wireless access network, frankly, whether it's 5G, 6G, Wi-Fi, LoRa, or satellite, or anything else, is actually quite small compared to what's going on in the core of the network. But I think we do need to take account of some of the changing world there. What I'm less convinced by, and is firstly, I don't think that we should be even talking about reachability and voice and messaging. And I don't think that the WhatsApps of this world, and frankly, even IMS, should have any role whatsoever in our discussions of 6G architecture. And I think in terms of sort of reachability, there's a part of the telecoms industry has always had this view that we ought to federate between all the different messaging apps, all the different voice services, and I'm completely on the opposite side of that. If anyone ever tried to federate WhatsApp and iMessage and RCS, for me, I would just block them on all channels simultaneously if I ever got a cross-network message. So I think we should decouple that from the discussion of what the 6G wireless environment ought to be. And what controls it. And here there's an interesting view of the world. There's this sort of one controller to view to rule them all view of the world. I'll be honest, have my doubts as to how practical that is, especially from a regulatory point of view. If it's bridging between different MNOs, you suddenly involve the competition authorities and everyone else. And it becomes a bit of an interesting political issue. And then on the Wi-Fi side of things, well, the idea that you are going to be able to tell the world's, 100 million, 300 million Wi-Fi networks what to do when they have installed their own equipment in their own home or their own office or wherever, or their own cafe or hotel, and say, you must allow cellular users to integrate, interoperate, roam, whatever the relevant term is, I think is going to get massive pushback from every enterprise on the planet on security grounds for a start, as well as ownership, control, compliance. And the risk here is you end up with public network services running on private property. And then there's all sorts of interesting questions about who's responsible for the network, who's responsible for what people do on that network, and who pays for it, frankly. If I'm putting Wi-Fi through my hotel, I know there's companies like the American Bandwidth which will try and do a deal with me to get paid by mobile operators to, whether you want to call it offload or interoperate their traffic. But that's a very fragmented business model at the moment. Not many of the MNOs are very willing to do it. Some of them will say, yes, we want it, but we need to have our policy management somewhere in the loop, which is hard. It's possible in some circumstances, but I don't think you can say that the world's, I can't remember what number I estimated, is 25 trillion square meter or billion square meters of indoor floor space, that all of that is going to be Wi-Fi covered, and is both the Wi-Fi owner will be happy to let cellular providers integrate, and the cellular operators will be happy with the Wi-Fi quality and security. I think there's a subset where it works, but I'm not sure everywhere. So I think that's where I tend to view the opportunity is actually letting the device, whether that's the device OS itself or a connection manager or the user or maybe an employer and a parent, define policies in a friendly way and work out when and where they use each network and whether they optimize for speed, for coverage, for privacy, for latency. There's lots of different sliders on that choice application. And in a way, there's almost like I come back to the AI thing. There's a bit of two philosophies I'm seeing emerging here, and very crudely, and there's obviously plenty of other market participants. I think there's going to be a Qualcomm view of the world, which is device centric, and I think there's going to be an NVIDIA view of the world, which is AI and compute and centralization centric. And a lot also along those axes, you could put Nokia and Huawei and Ericsson and the other vendors as well. And I tend to a little bit more towards the sort of Qualcomm vision of decentralizing the intelligence to the end device, whether it, and it knows where it is and what it's doing and where it's going, what applications are running, and also probably knows something about its users' preferences. And have that drive the connectivity. Now, that's quite difficult to enshrine in standards because a lot of the standards are right down at the radio layer, and a lot of this stuff is at the application or layer 7 layer, and user interface and behavioral, all these things which are very, very difficult to standardize. So I think that there's going to be an awful lot of challenges in the sort of cross-layer nature of this. One last point I would say is I think that 6G ought to be seen as, if you like, multi-stakeholder by design. And that the 4G, 3G, 5G to an extent have all been designed with the assumption that traditional mobile network operators, GSMA members, if you like, are all that matters. And then, yes, we've got some towercos, we've got some MVNOs, and there's some private networks that are run like GSMR in rail, or the military runs their own thing, or now we've got more private 5G networks. But they're always been viewed as second-class citizens. And I think that we ought to be approaching 6G and saying there is a huge diversity of organizations that will be building out cellular infrastructure, and that we should be agnostic to whether they're national MNOs, even supranational MNOs, or small local fixed wireless access providers, enterprises in a port or an airport, cities, even personal cellular networks in future. And then, of course, we've also got the satellite companies building cellular as well. And so I think that if we view 6G through the lens of, you know, multi-stakeholder, it's there for anyone to build a network, not just 3 or 4 operators in each country. I think we end up in a quite different place, both from a coverage point of view and in terms of the services and solutions. But it makes William's coordinator role even more tricky, though, unfortunately. I'll leave that there.
Thank you so much, Dean. I don't know. Just if I may comment on the last point, because I see similarity in William book. He also criticized the idea that operators are not represented in the process, and I'll tell you how I view it, at least from the perspective of a telecom regulator. So we go to the ITU. We have this working party 5D. It's responsible of setting the vision of 6G, or as we call it, IMT 2030. And the way I see it, everybody is there. So you have manufacturer, you have Qualcomm, you have Nokia, Ericsson, you name it. And then you have some big operators like Vodafone, UK, T-Mobile. So the argument that the interest of the operator is not presented there, I have many doubts on it, because you have GSA, you have GSMA, and you have many other alliances that are part of the process, whether on the standardization events in 3GPP, or whether it's regard to spectrum allocation at the ITU. So at least from my point of view, I think it's already multi-stakeholder process that we have for the 6G, as we did have for the 5G.
Okay, shall I dive back in again and pick up on some of all those comments? So thank you both. And I think I'm pretty well aligned with Dean. I do still think it's really important, at least for the next 10 years, perhaps, to have the ability to accept an incoming call message or whatever. Almost every day, I don't know, I rent a car, they want a phone number so that they can call me if there's an issue with that car. And then I go to my doctor, he wants a phone number so that he can call me if the results come in and he needs to get in touch with me urgently. And that may be a text rather than a call, but in all those cases, I need to give out something to these people that allows them to contact me. And I might want them to do that. Now I can refuse to take the call and they can leave a voicemail. But I think if we lose that functionality, at least for a while, we have a problem with the way a lot of stuff in the world functions today. So we still need something that allows contactability. Now we can be quite nuanced on what that is, but it's got to work, and it's got to work.
We can have that debate, William, but I just don't think it's got anything to do with 6G. I mean, I've literally come from a conference I was speaking at this week talking about the renaissance of voice communications and the role of AI in it and how telcos can help. And that was mostly focused on fixed telcos, that are looking to do essentially revitalize a PSTN, integrate it with IoT, or work for small businesses with unified comms. So this whole world of voice and to an extent video and messaging communications. And you've got the IMS people on one side, the CPaaS players, the unified comms, bunch of residential home. I just don't think any of that. Frankly, it probably belongs in IEEE or IETF. It's not a 3GPP thing. And when 3GPP's tried this in the past, we've ended up with things like IMS, which has had 20-year history or 30-year history of failure. I don't think.
So I agree. I agree that the actual sort of platform stuff is not there, but you need the contactability. You need to know where to route something, an IP stream to someone, and if I'm on a at the moment, if I'm on my cell phone and nothing else, then I don't have IP connectivity. The only way you can route to me is via my mobile number, and that's embedded within the 3GPP standards. So at the moment, unless you want to change that, you've got to change the standards.
I think at this point I'll do an appeal to agentic AI, and I'll just speak to the virtual William in the cloud, and that'll do. And you can determine when you and your AI clone connect. And I think I'm just going to sort of wave the magic AI and agentic wand at that, and get my own personal MCP server. But again, I think it's a different discussion.
Okay, in terms of things like Wi-Fi, I mean, I certainly wasn't meaning that every Wi-Fi router would have to just give access to the cellular network. It's very much something that a Wi-Fi router owner would choose to do. So I decide that I do want to be part of this broader network, the American bandwidth model or whatever, and I sign up to it, and I give permission for people to roam onto my Wi-Fi router, and I do so because maybe it's just good for my business to be able to say I'm part of it, or maybe I get some payment. And in return, I get things like full responsibility for the content taken over by whoever's providing that. So the legal intercept, all of the content regulation, all of the, is somebody looking at child pornography, all that kind of stuff, then moves up to essentially the controller of that, who knows the identity and has verified the identity of the person.
There's a couple of approaches there. There's open roaming. There's all the 3GPP ones, which I'm trying to remember, there's a chap from Cisco who's got a fantastic slide of all the 3GPP approaches to bridging Wi-Fi and cellular that have failed. And basically, the only one that's ever worked is Wi-Fi calling, and everything else, like ATSSS and ANDSF, and I can't remember all the other UMA and GAN and all the rest of it. Never got anywhere. So I think that the more probable is the WBA's open roaming approach. And I know in the UK, some of the operators are trying to do a slightly tweaked version of it, where a lot of it comes down to whether you want to put all of the traffic that is, if you like, cellular authenticated through the cellular core network, so you can enforce policy control and things like that on it, which is fine but clunky, and then adds latency because it's doing a round trip to wherever the nearest core network is. And we haven't mentioned the word latency here. And that is a little bit of a fly in the ointment for certain things, especially anything, it's probably more enterprise related, but there are some consumer applications which are more latency sensitive. And so the risk of routing things through some additional layer of coordinator is how distributed that coordination function is, and whether you've got 50 points of presence around the country, or 5,000, or 1.
Yeah. So first of all, I don't think you'd route it via the mobile operator core network. I want to get away from that. I want every network to be a pure bit pipe with no core network functionality beyond what it needs to manage its own network, essentially. So if you're on Wi-Fi, your traffic never goes to the cellular operator. It goes straight up to the internet, essentially. And indeed, the traffic doesn't need to necessarily go through the coordinator role as such. The coordinator only needs to set up the call in the first place, or whatever it is, the session. Once the session is set up, then the traffic can flow direct, as it does with Wi-Fi at the moment, to the website. Apart from potentially
I've been talking about local breakout. I've been talking about local breakout for like 15, 20 years. We end up with usually the compliance and legal department, followed by the commercial and competition and competition departments, and the people who are like, oh no, revenue leakage or control and data leakage. So there's a bit of conservatism there that might need a big regulatory stick to work around.
And essentially that's one of the reasons I think why it would make sense to put a lot of that regulatory stuff up into the sort of central coordinator function, because then it can essentially, you've got one place that any regulator can go to make sure that there's adherence and manage it. Just to pick up on Mohammed's point about operator representation, yes, they are there, but the problem they've got is if you go to a 3GPP meeting that's deep into the standards kind of stuff, so actually kind of writing the actual text that's going to become part of the standards document, they're not really there in those. It's dominated by the manufacturers, and you know, there's 200 operators or so. So are they all going to send 3 or 4 people each to all those meetings? Very unlikely. 1 or 2 of the bigger operators might. In principle, the operators could all bundle together and get NGMN or GSMA or whatever to attend on their behalf and input their standards requirements, and maybe that more of that will happen. But it's just, I think, inherently quite difficult for the operators to have a really strong voice at the detailed standards meetings. I think they can do much better at the ITU and those kind of places, but less so in standards.
So I have a question from William Leher here. What about all the blockchain identity management solution? Willie, why do you have to make my life that difficult? It's a very long question. Willie, Professor William, can you help me out here?
Yeah, so I can see the question. The hope for a single identity management solution seems doomed in the way that Dean suggests. Could you comment on how Agentic AI Genie will respond to this? Thanks for that, Bill. No, good comment. And I don't think we need to have a single identity. In a way, at the moment, in a way, we have a single identity. It's the cell number. And I'd like to move away from that because numbers are difficult to manage. There's a shortage of them. You've got to port them in various ways. There's all sorts of issues with numbers. And indeed, numbers don't work well for humans. We don't naturally remember everybody's phone number, but we might remember their email address because we can remember something more simple than that. So actually, I think we can have as many identities as we want, as long as there's a way to route information that's sent to any one of those identities to wherever I want it to go at that point in time, which will be the network I'm connected to and the device I happen to be using. Then that's all well and fine. Now, of course, we need to make sure people can't clone identities and pretend to be me when they're not and so on. So there needs to be some verification process when I initially sign up to make sure it's me and to make sure that that's valid. Could blockchain be used? I'm not sure. I mean, I'm sure it could. I'm not sure it brings anything necessarily to the process of that initial verification. You still need a way of making sure that I am who I say I am, and then maintaining that kind of thing.
I would say that firstly, the separate questions of identity and authentication mechanisms. I think that there are certainly different identities that we use for different things. So, clearly, you use a mobile phone number for some things, you use your email address for another, you use your bank credentials may well be something different. Your employee credentials often give you access to networks and IT resources. You've got your national identity. You've got at least 1 or 2 social network or online identities, whether that's your Apple ID or LinkedIn or Facebook or X logins, and so on. So there's a fairly large identity space, and I think in mobile it's about to be made even more complicated by, I think, a fairly rapid switch over the next 5 years, finally, to eSIM and probably multiple eSIMs per person or per device, which I think is going to complicate and all that's going to make William's reachability thing even more difficult. Is like, which of your 5 eSIMs do I use in a different place and different time? Each of which may have a different number associated with them. So I think that there is a set of use cases for blockchain in this. So there's a company I know that uses blockchain as a basis for asymmetric key encryption and identity to what they call a distributed SIM architecture, which has got relevance for, could be private networks. It essentially gets you out of the existing value chain for SIM or eSIM creation and key storage and key management and so on. So I think that has a role. I don't think that we're going to have one blockchain ID to rule them all, but it makes sense within a closed user group, and that closed user group might be an enterprise if they choose to go down that route. It could be a cluster or a fleet of IoT devices or users. So maybe you use blockchain identity between all of your fleet of robo-taxis, perhaps. And you also probably want to have identity associated with the infrastructure. So you want to avoid any chance of man-in-the-middle attacks, either on the radio or in the core network. And so essentially getting almost like a chain of custody of what are all the various pieces of infrastructure between me and either the person or the server I'm getting to. I think that's going to be quite important in future. So I think that there will be parts of that which are blockchain friendly and probably other parts which aren't.
So before we can take another question from the audience, because I promised at the beginning that I will try to play the devil's advocate. So 5G math, 2016, all right? And now we have 6G Manifesto 2025. If I'm being very subjective, I would claim that you both hate the idea of mobile generations. And if we're gonna have like 7G, William gonna have another book criticizing what 7G is. But at least from my perspective, 5G has been a huge success. And the idea that we don't need these speeds. I live here in Cairo and I consume alone like 40 gigabit of mobile traffic each month. Personally, I think the main, if I may say, problem or mistake of 5G was the idea of standalone and non-standalone. But even that, a couple of days ago, one from a huge mobile company, I wouldn't name it, but he pointed out to me that the two biggest countries in terms of standalone 5G deployment is China, and this is not a surprise, but India. And when I asked it about India, it turns out that in India, they have that India Geo, it's an entrepreneur company, and they decided from the beginning to deploy 5G standalone. So the way I see it, the standardization did give you a choice. 5G was a success, and if I'm consuming right now 40 gigabit, 40 megabyte, I'm gonna consume more in the future. Yeah, that's it.
I'm possibly. I think there's a couple of things here. First off, actually, I think that capacity rather than peak speeds are much better metric for measuring whether it's Gs or frankly anything else or satellite. And I think that almost like the availability of, I don't know, megabits per second per square meter or something like that, would be an interesting one to have. And I think that's relevant. And 5G does bring some advantages because of higher densities of MIMO, for example. So you don't necessarily need the peak speed, you need the capacity density. And there's possible ways to increment that in 6G with next-gen MIMO. It could be sort of AI-assisted beam management. There's a bunch of stuff to sort of squeeze more capacity out of any given cell and every given hertz of spectrum. And I think those are worth pursuing, to be honest. And I think that sort of on the technology sides of 6G, the ones which are very much about that metric of megabits per second per square meter, or however you want to measure it, or perhaps cubic meter if we include aviation and drones in there, is relevant. But the assertion that I'll definitely use more traffic in future, I know William will challenge that, and a couple of reasons. First off, a lot of the aggregate numbers we see from reported include fixed wireless access, which has 20 to 30x the traffic per user to mobile broadband. So you sort of have to consider that separately, because usually FWA is just used in certain places, it's discretionary, and it wasn't even included in the 5G infamous triangle. It was sort of added on later because everyone forgot about it. So to some extent, it wasn't actually in the original ITU IMT 2020 specs. There was no mention of FWA in that. So I think the other interesting question is around the traffic that you use, you're assuming that you don't use Wi-Fi more because it's more automated and more available. But I would say that fiber deployment is a one-way ratchet. The world in 10 years' time will have more fiber, and it will almost certainly have more Wi-Fi attached to the fiber in more places, and it will almost certainly have easier and more automated access to that. So I think that's one of the things that's happening in the background. The other side to this is a lot of that traffic is probably video, what we're doing now. There are possibly AI-based compression techniques. We already see this with not AI-based, but the latest generation of video codecs is actually leading to an absolute decline in traffic volumes on some networks. Now, that then says, well, you've got lower traffic, but you've got more compute energy resource in the data center on the device. So there's a bit of a trade-off there. But if we're going to a world where there's more GPUs everywhere, I would contend that more advanced compression is almost certainly locked in. So I wouldn't necessarily, say that that curve is enduring. I know, William, you've got plenty of views on traffic.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. So to pick up some of the great provocative comments from Mohammed, do I like generations? I mean, I think in the past they've been brilliant. So 2G, I think, was absolutely needed as a generation. It was really critical that there was coordinated activity across multiple countries and multiple operators to generate a single standard that could then drive the demand. And without that kind of coordination around 2G, I suspect we wouldn't see anything like the success that has come from it. So generations have had their needs, but we don't see generations in the world of IT, for example. We don't have the internet version 4 this year and then internet version 5 10 years later and so on. We have upgrades to the internet like IPv6, but it happens when it's needed. It's not something that happens periodically, and we have to have an IPv7 10 years after IPv6. We don't have automatic upgrades in laptops. We don't have them in cars. We don't have them in anything. No, stuff improves, but it's not on a 10-year must-happen cycle. It happens as needed, and I think that's the world we could move to now for cellular. So I'm not saying things shouldn't improve. They should, but we shouldn't have this forced, we must have something new every 10 years, because I think that leads then to us kind of overreaching rather and saying, oh, great, what's this new wonderful thing going to do 10 years from now? And then we get the problems with 5G. So was it a success? I mean, it depends on your measurement. It certainly wasn't compared to the promises and the hopes for it. And people hoped it would change the world. All it's done is provide a bit more capacity, which is a great thing, but it hasn't delivered against the aspiration. So I think for most, that's disappointing. But it works. It does deliver more capacity into the networks. We've all got 5G phones, so it's not a complete failure either. I think it's a useful thing to have, but we could have achieved it more simply with an upgrade to 4G, frankly, and probably in a more cost-effective manner than a whole brand new 5G kind of big bang kind of thing. And then to the point on data use, as Dean rightly said, I mean, the evidence suggests that it's all slowing down, and that evidence is pretty compelling, and you've seen the book, I'm sure. Now, for some individuals, due to their circumstances, it will be going up. In my case, mine hasn't gone up for about 5 years. It's been completely static. So it depends on circumstances. But we did see, as Dean sort of mentioned, just this week, a plea from the main over-the-top providers for AV1 video codec to be incorporated into all cellular handsets. And that promises a 30% reduction in video traffic when that's implemented. So if that were rolled out in a year or two, we could actually be in a world where traffic levels decline, as Dean mentioned, and going forwards, that may be the overall message around that one. Now, time will tell, and people will have long memories of how their usage has gone up and up and up in history. But I think it is, the evidence is that it's plateauing out. There was one quick question, I think, from someone about whether the coordinator role could help in rural areas. I mean, yes, it could. You can have it working in any limited areas that you want or not. But if you restrict it to certain areas, you have to know when to call upon it, if you like. So it's the standard problem of how do you manage incoming and outgoing messages if you don't have one single sort of centralized entity that looks after that. And I'm not saying we need one for the world. We can have one per country, and in fact, multiple ones per country, as long as they talk to each other and can coordinate what's going on between them.
There is another question, I think, but I like the discussion in the chat books. And again, I'm just playing the devil's advocate.
Yeah, absolutely. It's good.
I don't have even a 5G phone, so. But anyway, I think we did have a question earlier from Gunter, and sorry for keeping you to wait. The role of 5G as a general purpose. Yes, go ahead.
I think I like your critical attitude towards the 6G, but I would say I would like to broaden a little bit the picture of 5G, because 5G we can consider as a general purpose technology. The general purpose technology means that the benefits is not so narrow only from the communication side directly. That is one component. You combine that with different other components to get virtual networks, which are complementary to the physical side. And when you look at the physical side downstream, you have a lot of benefits. Electricity networks, e-health, you have these large areas which would not be possible without this disruptive change. 4G couldn't do that because you did not have the fixed mobile convergence. You need the fixed mobile convergence so that you can really get the latency. Now, latency is very extremely important when you have, for example, network vehicle allocation. The traffic of network vehicles in a town or so has been microseconds as what counts. And then you combine it with geolocation platforms. And all these benefits you could not get from 4G. But in contrast, when you look at the transitions which are now going from 5G to 6G, sometimes one is reading that 6G is now the general purpose technology. That is not the case. That is already 5G. But so 6G can only be something like an extension, this kind of, there are these applications. I'm not so much convinced that these innovations are so much becoming the driver. The driver is more, what can the users in the different application fields benefit? And that is already in the scope of 5G, was not in 4G, and 6G doesn't help so much. And these metaverse visions, I do not so strongly believe that can be the driver in the future. So I'm strongly in your line, but I think when you add the Internet of Things scenario in the picture, then your argument becomes even much stronger.
I would say that 5G vision was for this sort of multi-purpose and niches like connected vehicles. The reality is very different. And I would say the 5G, both the architecture and the standards process has failed because some of the ideas are just not implemented. In the statistic I heard, and it's anecdotal, was that in, say, the 2G and 3G era, roughly 80% of what was in the standards actually got implemented. Whereas for 5G, you can pretty much flip the 80-20 to 20-80, and that a huge amount of things that were theoretical and may even have had a standard written for them have never actually been commercially implemented. Top of the list, no, you can't get millisecond latency on 5G. Unless you've got a very, very carefully engineered private 5G network, maybe inside a factory, if you've got 5G modules in your little robots whizzing around on tracks or something like that, you might. But on the public network, no way. It doesn't exist.
No, I was thinking, sorry, but I was thinking that are all not really public networks. They need a kind of private access rules, because otherwise you cannot guarantee the quality of service guarantees. For example, look at the railroads, 5G-based railroad systems, at the electricity systems. They all use this not from the perspective of the traditional public internet, but from the perspective you have to have access rules to get access to this, the virtual network operator who is building the complementary side to the physical applications, he in order to guarantee the quality of service of the bandwidth, but also to guarantee the safety, the security issues, you have to get this access. You cannot make this kind of networks for free. That would be, maybe that is a big point to say 5G networks are the strong highway to private, that's the innovative private networks in a sense. Private in the sense that not everyone can use it. You have always the best effort that is one of the class of the traffic class somewhere, but if you want to guarantee the quality of transmission of the bandwidth capacity and also the sensor networks you need. All the sensor networks, you combine that with bandwidth capacities and also to combine it with cloud computing and all that you need to buy the access to the cloud computing. You get not that for free. Right? That all are in that sense private networks. That is
so perhaps. Yeah. No, please go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, but that is, I think, I was always, I find public networks are still very important. But when we want to look at the benefits of 5G, we have to look at the benefits to use these resources in a sense private, to say not everyone can get for free access to that. You need to when you are providing a platform which is running network vehicle applications or electricity applications, train in Europe, train is important also, 5G train systems. And there's a lot of standardization, 3GPP does a lot of standardization, and these standards are also applied, implemented. You can
sure, but FRMCS isn't going to be deployed until the 2030s. It's still being trialed. The rail industry is incredibly slow. Yeah, it's there's going to be early implementations. Maybe there's a 4G rail version for South Korea. I'm not quite sure it's being used in China at the moment, but in Europe, FRMCS is frankly the bottleneck isn't the wireless industry. It's the certification processes of the rail industry. And I've done quite a bit of work looking at rail as well. And the obstacle, well, first off, we've now at least got some dedicated spectrum, because you're never going to run the rail critical communications and control over the same physical network, or not as a virtual operator on top of Deutsche Telekom or Vodafone or anyone else. It'll be a dedicated infrastructure. You might use shared infrastructure for passenger communications or non-critical rail applications. I don't know, maybe you've got the staff communications for or sort of internal video for security or something. That's not low latency dependent.
So guys, if I sorry Dean, I feel like it's all my mistake, because once I said 5G was very successful, it helps break loose. but anyway, because I have 3 daughters knocking on my door, because it's Friday evening in Cairo. So, Dr. William, this is my favorite quote from your book, right? The 6G super tanker has already left the port. Government, manufacturers, standards bodies have activities in place that will result in 6G arriving around 2030. And stopping these is near impossible. This is real. 6G is already on board. I have personally a 5D meetings next week in Geneva. The train has already left the port. Yes. What do you have to say about that? And my personal, at least, concern with the rise of Starlink and D2D and the NTN, would NTN and D2D disrupt what 6G gonna be about? Do you think of it as a disruptive?
Yeah. So first of all, it's a good quote to pick. yeah, I don't for one moment think that 6G will be stopped or won't happen. And the reason for that is primarily because there's lots of entities, the manufacturers, the academics, and others who want it to happen and have strong interest in it happening. And there's very few people who would actually want to stop it altogether. There's not many people who would say, you know, I'm really going to make a big effort and I'm going to spend lots of money in order to stop this happening. The closest is the operators who just don't want it to be a really expensive thing. But as long as it happens along the terms that suit them, then they're fine with it too. So essentially, there's plenty of forces pushing it along and very, very few forces pushing back against stopping it happening. So it will certainly happen. But I think it's still up for players to what it's going to be. And indeed, you know, we've seen that if you go back a year, it looked quite likely it was going to be 5G on steroids. That was the key thing that most of the protagonists were saying. They changed their tune, and at recent 3GPP meetings and others, we've heard much more of a move towards the operator's desire for software only. We've heard that it's likely not to be a new waveform. It's going to be the same OFDM as others and so on. So we are seeing that someone's steering that super tanker somewhere else, which is what I was sort of hoping in the book might be happening. So I think the evidence is strong that you can change its direction. You just can't stop it. And I think we've still got time, although the time is running out perhaps now, to make further changes of direction as to where it goes, perhaps in the next year or two. And you know, that's what I was hoping to do with the book. But you know, I'm only one voice, and there's still a lot going on. Will things like NTN change things? I don't think it will change it much. I mean, it's been part of the 5G standards anyway. I think it will be incorporated, you know, continue to be incorporated in standards going forwards. I don't think it changes materially how you deploy a cellular network or things like that. It's a very useful add-on at the margin, but not something I think will make a substantive difference to networks. It could be a bit of a stronger argument for moving my kind of central coordinating point out of the cellular networks, such that satellite networks can directly provide service to cell phones without it needing to go through any kind of mobile operator link whatsoever. So you don't have to have an agreement with a mobile operator to get a call to a cell phone, which at the moment you pretty much have to because of like the identity type issues, because you've got to route it through the cellular through the satellite network somehow, somewhere. To do that, so maybe it makes that slightly different, but not a big issue.
Not really, I'd say, William. I mean, we've had satellite phones from the days of Iridium, even though they weren't commercial success. I mean,
right, but not using your mobile phone number.
Yeah, although there's I think there's ITU code for space-based communications, and there's certainly a bunch of satellite operators that are sort of buying. They're essentially buying off-the-shelf cellular cores. So essentially, you can be a satellite provider and you can have a cellular core network, but you're using just an NTN RAN. And I think we're sort of there already, to be honest. And you've also got the ones which circumvent that and do direct-to-device for IoT. With using NB-IoT, there's already a couple of satellite companies that are doing that. And you can also use MSS spectrum, and you've got a number of initiatives there, whether it's Apple with Globalstar or it's moment SpaceX is working with T-Mobile and others, but it wouldn't surprise me if we'll find that they do their own direct retail offer as well.
Yeah, but it's just the challenge of if I've now moved to a satellite network and someone calls me, back to that old example, what happens? Well, that call goes to the cellular operator, HLR, because that's where it always goes initially. And if the cellular operator doesn't know I'm on a satellite network, then it stops right there. So the cellular operator has to effectively put in a message in their HLR to say this person is now on a satellite network. And much is not.
Or they send you a WhatsApp, which will work anyway, and you say, here's a web link to, and fire up your browser and use WebRTC or Zoom or whatever else. I mean,
to be honest, but I'd like to be in a world where we didn't have to rely on WhatsApp for everything.
Yeah, or any other mechanism. You can, there's essentially all that stuff about reachability you can fix in the cloud. Doesn't need AI. It's basically there's a bunch of stuff, whether it's SIP based or whether it's SMTP or anything else. There's a bunch of communications protocols that it doesn't fix contactability, but you can tie it together in all sorts of ways. And if you care about it that much, you can essentially have a cloud. So you can essentially have assign an AI to answer your call, agent to answer your call, then forward it to, and you inform the agent where you are. It doesn't have to be centralized at all.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I'm suggesting. But it has to go somewhere. You have to have somewhere.
Guys, let's
Sorry,
end
Mohammed.
the panel on a good note. So, Dr. William, no, I've enjoyed that. Congratulations on your book. All right, Dean, thank you so much. You couldn't have done much better. I was expecting that from you, and sorry if I have made the
Oh,
We
I
lost
think I lost you there.
I think so, yeah.
I think one of his kids pulled the plug, I think.
Yeah.
It got too late. He overran his data allowance package.
Yes, we lost him. But I think we can close. And thanks so much for a wonderful discussion. It's a wonderful book. Go and buy William's book. I hope we will have more chances to discuss. Dean, wonderful points, very critical, loved it. Thanks, everyone. Of course, we should thank Mohammed for putting this together. He's not here. We will send him, I guess, our best regards and thank him very much. Thank you, William. Thank you, Dean, for your great insight in the time. It was a great session. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you.
Cheers.
He's back.
He's back.
Okay, so you can finish it.
But
Mohammed.
Valker, thank you so much for covering me. Again, thank you so much for this. I hope we're gonna have another webinar in the future. This meeting is being recorded. I'm gonna edit and put it on LinkedIn for people who have missed it, just to hear what has been the discussion. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Bye.